Today, we're unpacking a massive narrative, one that's literally shaped economic textbooks and government policies for almost a century. It's a story of war, hard data, and ultimately the very foundation of our entire financial system. And as we're going to see, the truth is actually hiding right in plain sight, just behind the numbers. Let's get into it. Okay, let's look at a wildly accepted economic narrative, the idea that World War II government spending somehow magically ended the Great Depression. The story we're all usually told goes a little something like this. In 1929, the market crashed. Families lost absolutely everything. Bread lines stretched for blocks, and unemployment stubbornly hung right around 15% for an entire decade, despite massive New Deal programs. Then suddenly, World War II breaks out. The government starts spending astronomical amounts of money, and boom, the economy is saved. Case closed, right? Well, let's look a little closer at that. Because overnight, factories that had literally been gathering dust roared back to life. But they were building tanks instead of tractors, bombers instead of cars. Defense spending absolutely skyrocketed from just 1.4% to over 37% of the nation's GDP. 17 million new jobs were created almost overnight, and unemployment plummeted below 2%. So, looking at those numbers, America looked incredibly prosperous on paper. And economists immediately pointed to this as rock-solid evidence that massive government spending can cure a broken economy. But when we look at the reality for a typical factory worker, let's just call him Jeff, the picture was totally different. Sure, Jeff had a steady paycheck from the local tank plant, but he was actually forced to save over 25% of his income. Why? Because strict rationing meant there was basically nothing to buy. No meat, no sugar, no coffee, and definitely no cars. I mean, car production had been completely banned since 1942. It was a statistical illusion. Think about it. GDP goes up by the exact same $10 million, whether a family builds a housing development or the government builds a bomb and drops it into the ocean. Jeff's family was technically earning more, but they were eating less than when they were dead broke. The real test actually came in 1945 when the war finally ended. The guns went quiet, 10 million soldiers flooded right back into the job market, and government spending plummeted by a staggering 60%. Everyone, literally everyone, from top economists to President Truman, predicted a massive, catastrophic return to the Great Depression. But the post-war data completely defied standard economic predictions of the time. Instead of crashing, unemployment peaked at just 3.9%. The economy didn't just survive those massive spending cuts, it actually thrived because of them. Resources that were locked inside the war machine finally flowed back into making things people actually wanted and needed. Now, to understand why the global economy was actually so broken in the first place, we need to quickly speed back to World War I. Look, wars cost staggering amounts of money, and when tax revenue runs dry, governments usually run straight to the printing press. But back then, currencies were backed by a gold standard. You couldn't just print money out of thin air without the physical gold to back it up. So what did countries do? They abandoned those monetary anchors to fund the trenches. And when the war ended, the printing didn't. They just kept printing to make their exports artificially cheaper, which sparked this frantic global race to the bottom, where every single nation systematically destroyed its own money just to undercut its neighbors. And this aggressive, unchecked printing led to devastating hyperinflation. In places like Germany, the printing got so extreme that a simple loaf of bread eventually cost 200 billion marks. A housewife in Berlin literally needed a wheelbarrow full of her life-saving cash just to buy basic groceries. It's almost hard to wrap your head around, right? It completely erased generational wealth overnight, breeding utter despair and total humiliation. As every nation played this exact same trick, destroying their own money to steal trade, nobody actually gained an advantage. All that was left was a fractured global currency system that absolutely nobody trusted. As a result, world trade collapsed by a staggering 66% between 1929 and 1934. And history shows us, pretty clearly, that the path from a broken printing press to a battlefield is tragically short. Desperate citizens naturally turned to anyone promising a fix, which perfectly set the stage for the Second World War. So, here is the absolutely crucial question. If dropping bombs into the sea and rationing basic goods didn't actually cure the Great Depression, what historical mechanism finally stabilized the world? Because the global recovery after 1945 was very, very real. If it wasn't government deficit spending bailing us out, what was the actual foundation of this unprecedented era of peace and prosperity? Enter the Bretton Woods miracle. Back in 1944, delegates from 44 nations gathered at a massive hotel up in New Hampshire. Their goal? Figure out a way to fix the broken global economy and prevent those disastrous currency wars of the 1920s and 30s. And the mechanism they came up with was surprisingly straightforward. This agreement, known as the Bretton Woods system, basically dictated that global currencies would be tied to the US dollar, and the dollar would be strictly tied to gold at a fixed $35 an ounce. This anchor established a hard, physical limit against the printing press. Politicians couldn't just turn their currency into confetti to temporarily boost exports anymore. For the first time in decades, paper money had real meaning, and more importantly, real restraint. Because of this incredibly stable gold anchor, real rebuilding could finally begin. Picture a post-war German citizen. Let's call him Friedrich. His city is just rubble, his machine shop is totally destroyed. But because of Bretton Woods, the money in his pocket is tied to a system he can actually trust. He isn't terrified it's going to be worthless by tomorrow morning. So what does he do? He confidently takes out a loan, he rebuilds, he hires, and he expands. Multiply Friedrich by millions across Germany, Japan, and France, and you have a genuine, booming economic recovery grounded in stable money rather than just temporary wartime spending. But there was the system's fatal flaw. You see, the Bretton Woods system laid an amazing foundation for decades of growth, but it contained a massive structural weakness right from the jump. Tying the entire globe's financial stability to a single country's currency, even one as powerful as the United States, created a ticking time bomb. The fatal flaw was pretty simple. Who exactly watches America? Think about it. If France or Japan printed too much money, the global financial markets would punish them overnight, and their currency peg would break. But the United States? It was the peg itself. It was the absolute anchor for everyone else. For a while, the whole thing held up perfectly. But then came the 1960s. The US government began spending vast amounts of money to simultaneously fund a massive welfare state at home and the Vietnam War overseas. They rapidly increased the supply of paper dollars floating around the globe to pay for all of it. But remember, under Bretton Woods, those dollars were supposed to represent real physical gold. As government spending skyrocketed, the actual amount of gold sitting in Fort Knox stayed exactly the same. The paper was suddenly far outpacing the reality. And the rest of the world wasn't blind to this. Realizing these excess dollars were mathematically becoming worth less and less, French President Charles de Gaulle refused to be the guy left standing at the back of the line when the gold finally ran out. He looked at America printing unbacked dollars and famously declared it, quote, robbery with better tailoring. So, in 1965, he literally sent ships and planes right across the Atlantic to hand in France's paper dollars and withdraw physical, actual gold. This initial French warning rapidly escalated into a full-blown global panic. Once France made their move, other nations quickly did the math and realized it just didn't add up. By 1966, the US held only $3.2 billion in gold, but had a staggering $14 billion in foreign claims against it. The dam finally broke in 1971. West Germany completely exited the Bretton Woods system, and Britain stepped up demanding $3 billion in gold. It was a classic textbook bank run, except the bank being run on was the United States of America. Facing a rapidly depleting gold reserve, President Nixon gathered his advisors in total secrecy at Camp David. On August 13, 1971, he shocked the world by going on national television and severing the dollar from gold entirely. He called it a temporary measure, but in an instant, it transformed every single global currency into unbacked fiat paper. Suddenly, the world's money was supported by nothing but a politician's promise not to print too much. The gold anchor was officially gone. And predictably, without that golden anchor keeping governments honest and enforcing financial discipline, the world immediately plunged right back into instability. Within just 2 years, the devastating oil crisis hit. Economic growth totally stalled while inflation surged, creating a miserable new economic reality that forced economists to invent a completely new word, stagflation. And it obviously didn't stop there. The following decades brought us the savings and loan crisis, the dot-com bust, and eventually the massive 2008 financial crisis. It seems like every decade brought a brand new mess, and without the gold standard, the default solution was always exactly the same, just print more money. To really wrap your head around the sheer scale of this currency debasement, just consider this. Under the disciplined Bretton Woods era, gold was strictly fixed at $35 an ounce. Compare that to the staggering projections of gold hitting over $5,000 an ounce by 2026. This isn't just about a shiny metal getting more expensive. This is a stark visual representation of the purchasing power of your money quietly evaporating over time without a stable anchor. Which brings us to our final thought today. The narrative of wartime prosperity is incredibly useful if you want to justify massive deficit spending right now. But as Keynes himself famously warned about debauching the currency, you really have to ask yourself, are we simply choosing to repeat the very same